This is part 4 of Sign of the Times series. It looked as if I escaped death one more time. I was now in a big bed in what appeared to be an old room. I looked around and wondered where I now was. It did not look like I was someplace that was bad. The bed was very comfortable, and when I looked around I could see very old dolls and wooden toys. A girl a bit older than me said politely that it was time to wake up. I did as she said while wishing her a good morning. She smiled and told me to stand still while she would dress me. This was strange. I could dress. When I told her that I could do it myself, she just laughed and said that it was her job. So I just stood there, as she undressed me and put on the prettiest dress I had ever seen. It was like one of the dresses I have seen once in a medieval film. It made me think that I was a princess. I went down to breakfast and sat with a lady. I knew that she must have been my mother. She also had a nice dress on, but she looked so old and tired. She smiled when she saw me. The breakfast was like porridge, so it was nothing that I liked. I did not want things to go bad as they did in my previous adventures, so I ate it up. After breakfast, Mom took me to a small chapel where we prayed. Then I had a tutor that tried to teach me Latin. I noticed other children my age around the house. They wore simple clothes, so I figured that they were servants. They were too busy to be in this small classroom. It was obvious that I was an upper-class child that had a life of luxury and did not have to worry. It was a nice change that my life was not in danger. I could live here and be spoiled. The thing was that the book saved me before when someone was about to kill me. How would the book save me this time? One thing I did notice was that it seemed that I had no dad. I met my mother and all the servants, but I did not see any man. It was not as if I had time to ask, as, after my lessons, I had to take music lessons and then learn how to sew. I wanted to ask if I had a dad, but it seemed like I was always busy doing something. I guessed that we were in medieval times and my dad was probably a knight. Maybe he was a hero that died in a war. The book did not send me to a bad place. I lived in a castle and had servants to help me. One of the servants told me that I was lucky I had a tutor. Most children did not have an education and had to work all the time. I was told that soon, I could be sent to a noble house and learn how to be a lady. This did not happen because I was special. I was not told why I was so special. I got used to daily life as a noble girl. I was helped in every way. The food was nice, although I did not like the porridge or soup. The lessons were hard. Latin was impossible to learn and I had to learn a lot about the Bible. It seemed as if I was always busy. When I observed what was happening around me, I noticed that children seemed to be treated like small adults and not children. I felt sorry for the children that worked here. They were given hard chores and worked many hours. I had no brothers or sisters, so this means that I was often left alone. I did notice that others gave me some strange looks. I would often hear them whisper to each other when I was close by. They had facial expressions that showed disgust and disapproval. I knew that they were talking about me. I did not know why they were not happy with me. I treated the lowest servant with respect. I never protested when I tried to do something. Despite this, it was obvious that I was not liked. This made me more desperate and tried to be more friendly with them. When I tried to converse with them, they would answer politely but not talk with me. All this treatment made me think that I was lonely. Was it because they were jealous? I knew that Mom was not happy. She always looked so sad and at times I could hear her cry. It made me think of my real mother. I remember when she would worry or even cry. She tried to hide from me, but there are some things you cannot hide from a child. It always was tough to see when she was this way and it made me feel so powerless. It was the same for my medieval mom. It was hard to see her so sad and crying. The only thing I could do was hug her. This made her smile for a bit and tell me how good I was as her daughter. In my previous experiences that the book sent me, there was always a lot of drama and my life was always in danger. I was hoping that this time it would be different. I was relieved when I came here and thought that this would be a safe experience. I even did my best to be obedient and well-behaved. However, I could see that there were troubles and this could mean that something bad could happen to me. A well-dressed man visited us one day and wanted to speak with us. I should say that he wanted to speak with Mom. Despite that I was there, he treated me as if I was invisible. He was mad at Mom. This must have made Mom very defensive as they were both mad and shouting. The rich man said that he had a message from the king. The king would not acknowledge me. He wanted Mom to stop her allegations. Mom was reminded that the king had given Mom a substantial allowance and gave both of us a comfortable life. The king was losing his patience and demanded that Mom would be silent. Mom would not listen and shouted that the truth should never be silenced. The king had taken advantage of her and it was only right that he took responsibility for it. This meant that he had to acknowledge my existence and where I came from. The rich man warned Mom that this would not happen. She had to understand that I would never be accepted or respected. Mom was asked if she wanted me to be the subject of ridicule and gossip, where I would never be respected. The man stormed out. I was confused. I knew that the argument was about me. I asked Mom why they were arguing about me. It's about time you knew, Mom started to tell me. When I was young, I was in the royal court. I was a God-fearing woman but also extremely innocent. The king had a crush on me and started to seduce me. He wanted an intimate relationship with me. I did not want this, as I knew that an intimate relationship outside marriage was a sin. The problem was that my dad was very ambitious and could see that an intimate relationship with the king could make our family richer and more powerful. Mom made a sign of the cross and continued, I obeyed my father and let the king have his way with me. Then I became pregnant with you. I have hoped that the king would marry me, but he did not. So I was disgraced because I suddenly had an illegitimate child. This meant that my reputation and virtue were ruined. Mom then wiped her tears as the story was not finished. I was not so worried about myself but worried about you. Being born out of wedlock is the worst start you could have. This would follow you for the rest of your life. The king knew he was your dad but would not admit to it in public. It did not matter that everyone knew you were a princess. If the king did not admit it, then you were considered born out of sin. The king then banished me from the court. We were sent here and he tried to make amends by making sure that we lived in luxury. I honestly did not understand what the big deal was. This story just showed how bad the king was. I remembered some children at my school in 2020 that had no dads and had no clue who they were. This did not mean the children were bad. Why should it be so bad if someone was born out of wedlock? A baby is a baby. A baby is always a miracle and a gift from God. A few days later, a priest tried to come and convince Mom that she should keep quiet. Once again Mom protested and said she was just telling the truth. The priest said I was a bastard and born out of sin. He advised Mom that she should concentrate more on my soul than on who my dad is. This outraged Mom, as she argued that I was the most saintly child she ever met, and she did not like when someone called me a bastard. I had a father that would not recognize me. This in turn outraged the priest as he told Mom that all children are born sinners and it is a mother's responsibility to cleanse our sins. As he went, the priest said Mom would be punished if she did not obey the king. This worried Mom for days. I remember stories from history classes about how kings liked to behead people, including their wives. So I was afraid that this was a possible punishment. It made me wish that I had two heads. I could see that Mom was worried about this punishment as well. She was in a dilemma. She did not think it was right to be silenced, and at the same time, she did not want to lose her head either. She told me that we would be moving to a hiding place. I do not think she thought about this clearly, as to how would we live? This meant that we would lose our life of luxury and I would end up being a servant or working on some farm. I knew that the magic book would give me problems. It would not allow me to live a normal and peaceful life. Maybe it would transport me home before this all happened. We spent weeks planning, as I was hoping that the book would do its magic any day. This did not happen. I was slowly getting used to the fact that there would be a major change in my life. My prediction came true. A day before we would move, the rich man came with some soldiers. One of the servants was a spy and told the king that we would move. The rich man told Mom that she was warned and that I would be taken away. The soldiers grabbed me and started to lead me out to a waiting wagon. Mom was hysterical and tried to cling to me and beg the soldiers not to take me. The soldiers pushed Mom back and put me on a wagon. As we rode away, I could see Mom on her knees praying and crying. I was also crying. I was in a horse cart being taken away from my mother. I was not told where we were going. I suspected that I was being taken to a cold, dark, and wet cell below a castle. I could be imprisoned there for the rest of my life, or the soldiers maybe wanted to behead me. The uncertainty of what would happen to me was torture. My thoughts remembered Mom on her knees crying in despair. It also must have been torture for her to see her daughter being taken away and not knowing what would happen to her. If the king wanted to punish my mom, this was the best way to do it. I was taken to a convent in the middle of nowhere. It was surrounded by a huge wall and we entered through big wooden gates. The place was huge, with big stoned buildings and fields that were farmed on. The soldiers led me through long corridors where I could see nuns walking around, scrubbing floors or doing some other work. They wore black habits with the nun veil. There were huge wooden rosary beads hanging from a belt. The place was so clean, and yet dark and cold. It was also so quiet. The only sounds you could hear were the shuffling of feet or when someone coughed. I was told to wait in a small room. The soldiers left me there all alone. I sat on an old wooden bench and looked around the room. There was nothing to see except 2 doors, stone walls, and a big wooden cross. I was confused as to why I was at a convent. Was it a boarding school? In a way, I was happy that I was here and not on a guillotine. Still, not knowing what my fate is made me a small bit afraid. It was like the times that I was outside the headmistress's office when I was in trouble. You knew that something bad was coming, but did not know what the punishment would be or when it would happen. This old lady called me into her room, which must have been her office. She took a seat at a huge desk and I stood before her. She told me she was the abbess of the convent. I would now be living in the convent as an oblate. I had no clue as to what an oblate was. The abbess told me that I would be living in the convent with the nuns. I would have chores and an education. I would be working very hard like the other oblates and the nuns. I would have time to pray to cleanse my soul from original sin. I was thinking none of this sounded fun, but the worst was yet to come. The abbess told me that I would never leave the convent walls. I would be too busy being an oblate, and when I was old enough, I would be a nun. This meant that I would spend the rest of my life as God's bride. Then I was told to take off the nice dress and put on the habit an oblate wore. It was a brown habit with the same huge rosary beads. The abbess told me that I could keep my long hair, which would be cut when I was ordained a nun. The habit was heavy and the material. It didn't feel as nice as the dress did. I am sure that I would be itching a lot. I never did like the color brown anyhow. The black robes did look better. The abbess was explaining to me the hierarchy at the convent. I was not listening all that much as I was trying to get used to the habit and the fact that I would be stuck at the convent for the rest of my life. I did understand that the abbess was at the top and what she said was the law. I also understood that I had the bottom status at the convent, and I had no say and I had no right to decide anything or even have my own views. The abbess told me she would explain the rules, and she would only tell me once. There were 3 rules I had to remember. The first rule was chastity. This would be an easy rule for me as I was still a child. It meant that I would never have a boyfriend or fall in love. This rule would be easy for me, as there were no boys in the convent to fall in love with. The second rule was poverty. This meant that I would never own anything. This would not be so hard. There was no mall in the convent where I could shop. The final rule was obedience. This meant that I had to do what I was told. This would be the hardest rule as I was not always obedient. My heart slumped because I knew this would cause trouble. I would do my best to do as I was told, however, I was not too optimistic. The abbess told me that the convent also had a rule of silence. This meant that I was not allowed to speak. The only time I was allowed to speak was when I was at prayers or when a superior asked me to. This shocked me. How could silence be something that God wanted? If he wanted people to be silent, he would not give us voices. I was never a silent type and my real parents would laugh at the idea that I was told I was not allowed to speak. I could only ever stay quiet for 5 minutes. This would be hard. The abbess told me that it was time to pray. We went to the convent chapel which was quite nice. The rest of the convent looked so poor and unfashionable, but the chapel was beautiful. The nuns came in and started to pray. It was all in Latin and the prayers sounded like chants. I wondered if God really listened to this chanting. It was prayers from the Psalms or something someone else wrote. There would be thousands of nuns chanting the same all over the world. Would this mean that God would be tired of listening to so many prayers that are the same? The good thing is when I looked around at the nuns, I could see that they were deep in prayer. They all looked like saints. This made me think about why they wanted to be a nun. Why would they sacrifice a life where they could have a family and freedom? A life where they could speak. Did they become a nun to escape poverty or was their faith in God so strong they wanted to dedicate their whole life to Him? Maybe they were forced to be in the convent like I was. I was told I would be here the rest of my life, and I did not have a choice. Still, it was better than losing my head. After prayers, we had supper. After the events of the day, I was quite hungry. It was a bowl of porridge and bread and water. The abbess said a very long prayer before we ate. I closed my eyes and was sure that everyone thought I was praying. In reality, I was thinking about how good a burger would taste. We finally had permission to eat. Everyone was silent except a nun that read from the Bible. This would be the routine from now on. Silence and eating while we listened to the Bible. When we were done eating, the abbess said it was time for Sister Ellen to do her penance. We were all led to a huge hall where Sister Ellen was tied to a pole. Then another nun started to whip her. I did not want to look at the poor nun being whipped. I looked around at the other nuns. They were praying for Sister Ellen's soul. I could hear each whip and the screams of Sister Ellen and when she pleaded to God for forgiveness. Whipping was inhumane and I doubt that she committed such a bad thing to warrant it. It seemed like such a cruel punishment. I did not sleep well that night. The bed was hard and the little room I was in was dark. The whipping scared me. What if I made a mistake? How would I be punished? It made me think that a convent should be a place of happiness and a community where the nuns shared their strong faith. How could this be? I imagined that many of the nuns started as an oblate and were imprisoned here for the rest of their lives. There were strict rules and I experienced what would happen to me if I broke them. I hoped that the magic book would take me to a different time. I was now an oblate and even though I was with other nuns, I felt so alone. The rule of silence was so hard. I had many chores to do and I did not mind these. I did not mind the simple food. I did not mind the many prayers there were. What was hardest for me was the silence. I had so many questions that could not be asked. I missed the ability to speak with another human. I did not understand why we were forced to be silent. How did this bring us closer to God? I always spoke a lot and I admit that at times, it got me in trouble. I remembered getting demerits at school in my own timeline of 2020 when I spoke in class. Now I was forced to be quiet all day. I felt at times that I would explode and sing a song as loud as I could. One of the jobs I had was scrubbing the floors. This was a chore that those lowest in the convent's hierarchy had to do. It was a tough job. My body would ache as I knelt on the floor and scrubbed. I would try to think of good things as my tired arms continued the chore. I would try to think about anything but the pain I had in my knees. At times I would rest only to have a nun walking by and using sign language for me to get back to work. The worst thing was that when I scrubbed a floor that was so clean, a nun would walk on it and this resulted in the floor looking like it was never cleaned. It was good that the nuns could not hear me cursing in my mind. There was another oblate there that was younger than me. I found out that her name was Mary. I wanted to speak with her and be her friend. It seemed so cruel that she was younger and an oblate like me. She should have been with her family and gotten the love her parents could give her. As we could not speak, it made me think of her circumstances. Why was she locked up in a convent? Mary and I were allowed to speak at our daily lessons. We were taught Latin, catechism, and plants and herbs. Being allowed to speak was great, but we were not allowed to speak with each other. This made Mary such a mystery to me. I felt sorry for her that she found the classes so hard. Mary must not have been used to school and at her young age, the lessons we had must have been very hard for her. They were hard enough for me. It was still Latin that was the hardest for me. I was sure that I would never learn it. The abbess was pleased with me though. She called me in the office and told me she was happy that I adjusted so well to life as an oblate. I told her that the whipping scared me, and the chores often wore me out and gave me pains in my body. I also admitted that not being able to speak was torture. It made me feel so alone. "You are not alone," she said, "God is with you. Dedicate your work and thoughts to Him. When work is too hard, let your suffering bring you closer to God. Suffering is worthwhile when we offer it to our Lord. Suffering cleanses our souls. So do not be afraid of hardship and a cross to carry." I wanted to sigh. I was so confused. How would suffering bring me closer to God? I remembered when I time traveled when I saw Jesus being crucified on the cross. He suffered for our sins in an ultimate way by being tortured and hung on the cross. I found it hard to believe that Jesus would want us to suffer to get closer to Him. Did the nuns here misunderstand the love of Jesus and convince themselves that the only way to heaven was to suffer? I am sure that Jesus just wanted us to believe in Him and lead a good life. I could understand that some may suffer for their belief in times of persecution and when it was not allowed to believe in Jesus. This is martyrdom and something different than punishing yourself in order to get closer to God. I was now getting used to life in the convent. It seemed as if the magic time travel book would not be taking me away from here and bringing me home to 2020. My day was a routine of prayers, hard work, and lessons. I had no free time as every hour was planned. To be honest, I did not mind the life at the convent. The one thing that I did mind was the vow of silence. I missed someone to speak with. At times, I thought I was going crazy as I would find myself speaking with myself. This could never be a good sign. One day Mary and I were weeding in the herb garden. I tried to whisper to her and tell her my name and ask her how she came to be an oblate. Mary looked around to see if any nuns were around, and then when the coast was clear, she told me that we were not allowed to speak. After some time she told me that her parents were poor and could hardly feed the family. Her parents brought her here, despite that she knew she would not be happy here. The one good consolation was that it would help her parents to get to heaven. Mary and I talked when we could. She even started to smile. I felt sorry for her, as she did not want to be here. She told me that she cried at night time when no one heard. I knew that she felt sorry for me. Mary heard that I was the king's illegitimate daughter and the king was hiding me here out of the public eye. I was an embarrassment to him. You can say that the fact that we were both forced to be here gave us something in common. We agreed that we would be friends. The abbess knew that we talked and called us both to her office. We were warned that we would be punished if we were caught talking again. Then she told us that she had a responsibility to cleanse our souls as oblates. According to the abbess, children were born as sinners and were easy targets for Satan and all the demons. She called it original sin. As children, she said we were carrying the sins of Adam and Eve, plus all our ancestors. Then the abbess used me as an example. I was born out of wedlock and this was not God's intention. The abbess said that I was a bastard and I carried this sin that my parents made. Mary and I hardly spoke after this. Mary was terrified of the abbess and was afraid of what the punishment would be. I did not believe what the abbess said. I could not be held responsible for what happened in the Garden of Eden or what my parents did. I believe that children were born without sin and sinning was something that we have learned how to do. All this made me miss my home in 2020 and my real parents. This made me cry at night in my small cell. I tried to remember how my parents looked. It was as if they were just a faded memory. I remember the good times we had and how they loved me and treated me as if I was the most important thing in their life. It made me think if the time travel book would ever send me back to them, or would I be stuck going traveling through history for the rest of my life? I could be stuck here at the convent for the rest of my life. Then my real parents would be reading about me as a saint. I tried to make the most of my life at the convent. I did what I was told and tried to be very saintly. Still, I had no respect from the other nuns. They knew that I did not have parents that were married and the king would not recognize me as his daughter. I could see that they looked down at me as if I was dirt. It was hard not being liked or respected. It's hard that some thought I was a subhuman because my parents were not married. I tried to cheer myself by singing. I would wait until I was alone and sing until I started smiling again. This was bound to get me in trouble, and it did. One of the older nuns caught me and dragged me to the abbess. The abbess made me stand and wait for her judgment for an hour. I remembered when the nun was whipped and thought this would be my fate. I could feel my heart galloping as I remembered every whip. I knew that this would never happen to a child in 2020, but I realized that children were not treated as children in history. They were treated as small adults. On top of that, this convent thought that children were sinners. I was not whipped. The abbess yelled at me for a long time and said that I would be fasting until she decided I should eat again. I was allowed to drink water. She hoped that this would cleanse my soul. So I was forced to work and pray now that every time the nuns ate. The worst punishment was when they told me to sit and watch them eat while I drank water. I never thought that the gruel they ate tasted good, but when you are hungry, it looked like the best meal ever. Fasting was hard. At first, I could feel my body begging for food. I didn't expect that I would last more than a day, but after 3 days I was still fasting. I felt as if the hunger was constant and I was becoming weaker and more grumpy. This punishment was inhumane. The worst was when I did not have hunger pains and did not care if I would ever eat again. I would feel as if I would faint, and this could be a sign that I would die. I do not think that fasting made me feel closer to God. I felt more bitter. How could anyone treat a child like this? Where was the Christian love that they preached about? The abbess visited on the 3rd night with food with 2 other nuns. She asked me if I feel like I have repented during the fasting. I ate the porridge and did not say much. I did not remember any manners when I was eating. I was sure that I would get a stomach ache sometime later because I was eating so fast. The abbess continued to ask me if I have repented and would work to cleanse my soul. I am not a bad person, I shouted as I lost my temper. It is not my fault that my parents were not married when I was born. It is not my fault that the king won't recognize me. It was the king that was wrong by hiding me here against my mom's will. You always say that I am a sinner. I am not. I think that God loves me for who I am. He does not see me as a mistake or a sinner. He sees me as one of his children. The abbess got mad and told the 2 nuns to tie me down to the bed until she decided what would happen to me. I tried to struggle and fight, but after 3 days without eating I was weak. I was soon tied to the bed. The nuns left me there as they left the room. Being tied to the bed was torture. I was on my back and could only see the ceiling. I could not move. I tried to sleep. I was afraid, frustrated and restless that I was tied down to the bed like some animal. The abbess had no heart or compassion. This must have been child abuse. How could anyone think it was acceptable to treat a child this way? I had understood by now that children had no rights and we were at the mercy of the grown ups. I must have spent the whole night there on the bed. The abbess came in the morning and I was untied. She told me that she had thought of my punishment. Then she sighed and told me that she had tried to help me. Despite this, she could see that I was a lost cause. I would never be a good oblate or nun and she did not want me to corrupt the others. She told me the 2 nuns would lay some bricks and build a wall where the door was. I would be locked in this room for the rest of my life. I would never see another human being again. I could not corrupt the others. There would be a hole in the wall where I would get food and drink. I begged and pleaded for her to have mercy. If she had mercy, I would never speak and always do what I was told. The abbess left as the 2 nuns started building the wall. I dared not kick it and destroy their work. Who knows what my punishment would have been then? I just sat in the corner and cried. Within no time the wall was built. I was now secluded in the small dark cell. I would never see another human being again. I would never see anything except this dark and cold cell. I knew that I would end up going crazy and being mentally insane. I just sat there and cried. There was no hope. A fog started rising from the ground and there were thunder and lightning in the cell. Everything went black. When I woke up, I was not home with my parents in 2020. I was standing in a courtroom with people in Thanksgiving costumes. To be continued in Signs of the Times Child Witch.